All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Kristin Marchesi. I'm gonna try that one more time. Here with Kristin Marchesi. It's April 28th, 2021. We're at Abbott Claim Winery in Carlton. Kristin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
First question, biggest question, why wine?
Well, that's like the heaviest question, I guess. I think, I grew up in wine. This is what I knew, although I never thought I would actually be in wine. And what I've come to understand when I reluctantly got into wine in 2006 and now here I am, is that it's an incredibly dynamic business. I mean, there's very few things that you take from the ground, agricultural, and then have to take it all the way through production, marketing, sales, finance. So it covers all of the bases. And I think also just the community and its attention to sustainability and while I think certain things in the wine industry are quite archaic, there's also people who are really pushing the boundaries and there's opportunity for that. And I think that is something I love.
You mentioned kind of growing up in it. Tell us about your early vineyard.
Sure, yeah. So I was literally born on and raised in a winery in New Jersey. It's still there. It's called Vineyard. Well, I guess it wasn't a winery when I was born. They planted it 2 years after I was born. But so it was an old dairy farm that my dad took and turned into a winery, and we were about 90 minutes from New York. And so at the time, in the late 70s, this was a very agrarian community. So it was great. We were 90 minutes from New York, but we were surrounded by dairy farms and corn and tomatoes, et cetera. And so basically we lived and died off tourism from New York and Bucks County and those more wealthy suburbs. Mm-hmm. And I grew up probably like many people here, getting off the bus, helping bottle, working in the tasting room, giving tours when I was a little kid, and pruning in the summer. And it was just the family business, and again, it was very direct consumer driven. We did have some distribution, but New Jersey wine is not like renowned, so there's not a lot of distribution. Although I think he really did a good job, but given the challenges of farming there. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it was just our lifestyle. It was what we did. Mm-hmm. And I grew up running through the vineyards and on my friends' four-wheelers, but we had to be careful because of the wires, so you didn't want to get caught in the neck. It was just part of my life. And my dad actually had that winery until he purchased Montano in 2006. So that was, his partner bought it out, and the sons that were little when my dad sold it are now adults and running this with their dad. So it's really cool to see that sort of second, third generation mm-hmm. be part of that, and having them grown up on the same property that I did and getting to do different things. And but yeah, I mean, I was in it. I was in the production side and the whole thing, and so, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I thought I never wanted to do it again. Mm-hmm. But certainly the industry out here and in general is a little bit more sophisticated than it was.
You mentioned growing up in it, not wanting to be part of it necessarily. Yeah. We've heard that as kind of a familiar refrain for a lot of people who grew up in it. Tell me about your memories of it and about your as you started to realize there were other ways, there were other things to do. What did you want to do instead?
Oh, well, at first I wanted to be a theater major. I was a theater major, and I thought that I would really love, not so much acting, but more of like the behind the scenes. Like I really thought just set design and lighting and more of those like structural things were really interesting. And then I cooked professionally, and I thought for a hot second that I would want to do that, but I got over that pretty quickly. But then I found myself going back to, landscaping. And so when I finished college, I had 2 jobs. I worked at a cook at a restaurant at nights, and then in the mornings or during the day, there's this place in Northeast Portland, which was a historic home, and it was on a conditional permitting thing. So I don't think it's still there as it was, but because it was residential. But regardless, it was this beautifully landscaped place, and so I started out just doing all of their landscaping and not necessarily, obviously it wasn't mowing the lawn, but it was mm-hmm. amazing, and then ended up running that business. And so we did a lot of events, and we were like the early supper club place actually that, and this is early 2000s. And so I really loved that dynamics, right? Working with chefs, but also working with the land. And so that, I think I thought I would get into landscaping and agriculture, or not necessarily agriculture, but landscaping, because that's a format and I was really comfortable in. I really loved working with plants, but I was good at running things. So my focus kind of shifted, and then I ended up working at Andina and starting their special events program right when they were really getting up and running. And then my dad asked me to come work for him, and I said no for about 3 months because I really loved my dad, and I was like, we want to spend Christmas together. This is going to be a bad decision. And he finally just kind of broke me down. And I remember what really did it was I'd gone out to dinner with him, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I got a call from my GM and asking me something about whatever they're closing up for the night. And I got off the phone, and my dad looked at me, and he said the greatest lie he's ever said, "Kristen, there are no emergencies in the wine business." And I thought, right, I see this, and I fell for it. And I was like, you're right. It's just, I knew it wasn't, a fairy tale, but again, it was not that simple. So then I started to work with my dad, and that was a complicated scenario because he bought an existing winery with his existing team, and then he brings his 26-year-old daughter in to run the marketing, and so you have to learn to, I had to earn my respect, and that was pretty hard actually, and I had to do it systematically. Every single person I came in contact with, I had to earn their respect. Otherwise, they just sort of thought I was this princess. And yeah. So anyway, that was the path. But I think there was a lot of different things that I focus on, but all of those connect within the wine industry. If you're talking about gardening, culinary, and of course running business.
So we're going to come back to Montano in a second, but
Sure.
I'm curious about your path a little bit. Before that, you mentioned education. You mentioned being in Portland. So tell me about how you got to the West Coast and kind of your educational process.
Yeah. So I went to boarding school in Philadelphia, and so when I went to college, which was also a roundabout thing, I went to Boston University, and I was in a dorm with a bunch of 18-year-olds, and I kind of was like, oh, I've done this before. This is not my scene. Like, I've lived away from home for a long time. And I also just, I went to a Quaker boarding school, which was a great school, but we had so much autonomy, and, part of Quakerism, we didn't call our teacher Mr. So-and-so, we called them their first names, and it was, there was a lot of self-regulation. And so there was I just didn't really like the kind of, the feeling that I was just a number and that I was a kid, and when I felt like I had more, I wasn't any more mature, but I thought so. So I was talking to my sister, and she had gone to Reed College in, 1992, and she was living in Portland, and she's much smarter than I, and she said to me, maybe you should look at the school in Washington. It was Evergreen, and she said, I think it's good for you because it's hands-on, you'll just do the stuff instead of having to sit and read about it, because I was just much more action-oriented. So I thought, I didn't even go. I was like, sure, yeah, let's just transfer there. So I transferred there, which this tells you a lot about my dedication to education. And I moved to Olympia, and I was there for about 8 months, and I realized, these aren't my people. And I moved to LA with my friend that I'm about to go see, and did an independent study there. I have no idea how I got away with that, and worked in restaurants and had a great time. And then, and I was there for the morning of September 11th. And actually my dad happened to be in Santa Monica for work, which was bizarre. And so I, went and saw him, and I realized, like, what am I doing here? This isn't my culture. These aren't people that it's just not a life I want to live. And so I just decided, okay, I'm going to go up to Portland, and I'm going to stay with my sister and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And so, I did, and then she kicked me out like 3 months later or something. She was I love my sister, we're quite close, and she was right to do it, because I didn't have any direction. I didn't really know what I wanted, but I had enrolled in Portland State because I just felt like I just needed to have some kind of anchor and grounding. And I stayed. I mean, I just stayed, and life here is amazing. I mean, there's parts of me that miss the East Coast. You know, you can give the finger to people on the highway when they are in your way. You don't have to wave. You know, there's very directness, which I miss. But I loved it. So I finished at Portland State and a path of least resistance, did the theater degree because I knew I wanted a degree, but I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And anyway, here I am 20 years later.
It's an interesting path, for sure.
It's not linear.
You developed this strength in business and running businesses. Tell me about that, how that kind of came to be, and about the work, especially like the culinary work you were doing at the time.
Yeah, I don't really know, honestly, how that came to be. I think part of it is just like my cultural modeling. So my dad ran a winery, and then when I was in 5th grade, he did that on the weekends and started to work for a distributor and eventually became their like VP of brand development or something. And it's now a pretty large distributor. It's what is now Allied Beverage, which is pretty big on the East Coast. And my mom was a midwife, and she went from being, you know, a lay midwife who did home births to being the first midwife to legally be able to deliver in hospitals and within this large area.
Wow.
And so I had these two parents that were really ambitious and juggling a lot, and you know, prioritized our education. We went to grade schools, and so I think there was always, you know, there was always some structure that was there, and it was always very driven towards achievement and work and career. And so I think I, in some ways, was just like naturally around it. But even when I was little, when we would go to, maybe I remember being 12, and we would go to the, New Jersey had a lot of festivals. Like you'd go to a wine festival, all 30 wine growers would be there. There was like a goat milking contest, and there was like all the stuff, right? This is the 80s. And so at the end of the day, my dad would give me the money, and I would, you know, I would work and sell the wine and do all this stuff, and he'd give me the money to count, and whether or not I did that right, or I have no idea, but I think they were just giving me these responsibilities that were very, you know, and I was reliable. So I think I just had certain abilities to do that. And then, yeah, I think actually for me it's almost like an area of insecurity because I don't have any formal training in it, but learning on the job is actually, you know, in some ways better. And so I think at Montano I ended up doing more business management just to balance out what my dad did. I mean, certainly he's great at that, but he also was really comfortable and loves viticulture and winemaking. And I think what we ended up doing was just finding where we both fit working together. And so that was something that kind of became part of what I did. And I half left there because I wanted to make sure that I could do it on my own. You know, I didn't need him, and I don't. But, which is good. But, and then obviously coming here, which is a completely different structure, and being able to create a completely different wine business than what I walked into here has, you know, helped reinforce a lot of skills, and I've learned a lot, and, you know, you can never stop learning. But I think in some ways I was just kind of predisposed to it.
You mentioned Andina earlier as one of the projects you worked on. Tell me about the work there and kind of the other kind of similar work as you were helping these restaurants get their kind of marketing and events going.
Yeah, I mean, so this was in, gosh, when was it? 2004, 2005. They just had this like big food and wine spread, and they won Restaurant of the Year from the Oregonian, which at the time was like a really big deal. Not that it's not now, but then it was a different, you know, press was a different thing back then. And so they had a tiny little private dining program, and without a lot of business, and the Platts are just a wonderful family and had a really ambitious model, and the labor associated with the food there at the time, I haven't eaten there in a while, so I don't really know, was really high. So they needed to figure out how to get more bodies through the door. And so I don't actually know how I knew what to do, but you know, essentially I just spent months cold calling people, bringing in event planners, you know, just trying to network within the city, just getting people through the doors, and it was really pretty cool. We grew from one room that I had to book of 16 seats to having 3 different rooms that we had to book and renting out the spaces above. And, one of my last events was literally a buyout of the entire building. And so I felt like I really left them in a good place with a lot of business and return business. But that was just hard work. It was just calling people. There was no like dynamic digital program or retargeting or whatever. It was just picking up the phone, figuring out who people were, pre-LinkedIn, Portland Business Journal. It was a different time.
Wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. I know, it really wasn't that long ago, but it was, the mechanisms were so different. I almost missed them. They were maybe a little less mysterious.
So you had said earlier that one of the things you had thought you might be doing would be chef, cooking, and then you realized that wasn't to be. So tell me about that for you before Montano. Why did you want to be a cook, and then why did you not want to be a cook?
I loved it. Like I still love cooking. It's part of my family culture. But there is also, there's the adrenaline of being on the line. There's the culture of that camaraderie in the kitchen. There's like the structure, but also the creativity within that structure. When I was cooking in LA, but it was easier for me to get a job in the kitchen than as a waiter or a waitress. And so it was in some ways also like a path of least resistance. Wow, this is a theme. This is good. But I loved it, and it was really satisfying. And I knew I never wanted to do dinner. My dream thing would be like a breakfast and lunch place in a small little tourist town so you have some controls on your time. I don't love to be up till 2 a.m. and back at 10 prepping. I don't think that's a life for me. But I also, so I think part of it was the kitchen culture I didn't really like. It was pretty abusive. And so, certainly I thought I could change that. But I also knew the economics of a restaurant, and when I was doing that was in my early 20s, and the idea of getting funding to open up something small somewhere was just way beyond my scope and what I knew how to do. And I cooked a lot at events and for wine club, and I got to put that in action, and actually it's something that's served me my whole life, just actually professionally as well as personally. But, I think at the end of the day, I think I would have gotten bored.
So you've been talked back into the wine industry now by your dad after many months of trying. What did you expect? What were your anticipations when you got back in, and what were your kind of initial impressions of Montano and of the Oregon wine industry as you were getting to know it? Yeah,
honestly, I don't think Montano had a lot of respect at that time. So my dad, I said, well, okay, Dad, I'll work for you, but first thing we have to do is change your label. Like, that's the immediate thing. This label is terrible that you designed, which he took really well. Truly, he raised me, so he knows what to expect. And we weren't really well respected by our neighbors. And so I think one of the things that I realized was how we were not involved in the community. And part of that was done by the original ownership, and my dad lived bi-coastally. He didn't move out here until 2006. He would come out for 2 weeks a month and go back and forth. And so, I had a couple things was, wow, I need referrals, and I need to make my neighbors like us and respect us. And so that was something I realized that I needed to do. And I remember my dad said, call Maria Ponzi. She works for her dad. She'll help. And I was like, okay. Actually, she was so gracious. And I wonder if she even remembers that. But she was very gracious. And so that was something I realized I needed to do, is really engage within the community. And I didn't know anything about wholesale. I didn't know anything about wine marketing. I really knew nothing. And so there was definitely a learning curve, to do a work with. And I remember calling my dad in some grocery store somewhere being like, Dad, I've been waiting for 45 minutes. This guy's taking an order. Like, this isn't even a place where we're going to sell wine. This is bullshit. Like, what are we doing? And he was like, Kristen, this is called a milk run. this is great. You've done one. Now you know how to identify it. And so I had sort of those moments, and how lucky to have your boss be your mentor, because I can call him and be like, what is happening? And he would just give it to me straight. So I, and again, being the daughter of the owner is, people are more likely to treat you not as well, or with as much respect. So I ended up kind of dealing with a lot of that, and I'd get weird backhand compliments that were like, when I found out I was working with you, I thought I was just in for a terrible day and that you're going to be a total princess, but you can come back in my car anytime. I'm like, thank you for that backhanded compliment. So I got a lot of feedback like that, and that was surprising to me, but also I didn't really know what to expect. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was really surprising to me was how hard it was for me to earn the respect of my coworkers, but I also know they had gone through a lot of upheaval and change, and I was 26, so I'm sure I was just like a little brat, and I'm sure that I behaved poorly at times as well. It's not them, it's not all. It's everyone plays a role in dynamics, and so those are more like personal things, but that was like the most surprising thing. But also, what was really cool for me was we had a story. We had really ambitious farming plans, and we had ambitious plans, and my dad bought a company that was undercapitalized and short on inventory, and we had a tough road ahead of us. And but in retrospect, I didn't think this at the time, but in retrospect, I now realize how lucky we were to have such a solid foundation to build a brand on, and so in some ways, rebranding that and taking that to market was kind of easy, because we had just so much to work with, and so now I'm like, that was a dream. That was a total dream, and I got really, really lucky.
I'm curious about some of the strategies you used, both internally with your coworkers and externally with your neighbors and the industry. How did you ingratiate yourself? How did you earn respect?
I mean, all you can do is work hard. I got involved with the Washington County wineries. I can't remember what it was called, Washington County Winery Association, I think, at the time. And legitimately, my first meeting, they needed a new president. And somebody was like, you just had like a sucker stamped on your forehead. And so somebody, you could tell what a great job this was. Somebody nominated me. I was kind of shocked, and so I just said okay. But it was great. I mean, it was at a time where DMOs were starting to invest in wine associations. So I was able to get a grant, hire an executive director, and so we actually had some programming for this little group of wineries in Washington County. And so and I reached out to people that maybe had vineyards in Washington County but weren't in Washington County, so we were able to broaden our scope and got to know our neighbors that way pretty well. Elk Cove was a partner in that we got to know well. Cooper Mountain, Ponzi, we all worked together at Bologna. And so I think I just worked and got some traction, and then burnt myself out, as one does in those associations. And at the winery, it was two things. One was I had to I remember they were starting to track my hours, which was really annoying to me. So I would go in, I would go in at like 5 a.m. or go in at 10 a.m. and I would just start messing with my hours so they couldn't track me, because I realized that they were just trying to find fault in me and flaws. And so I just was like, fine, go for it. I'm gonna be completely unpredictable, and you're not gonna know how to handle me. But I think, they also saw that I was selling wine and I was traveling and I was doing these things that were benefiting everybody. And so there were some people that it really did take some work, but after, when I left 13 years later, they're the people that we exchanged Christmas cards. We really had to work on our relationship, but I ended up just having such a soft spot for them. So it's funny how that happens. But yeah, hard work and also probably a little manipulation, if I'm honest.
Leadership.
Yeah, sure, leadership, showing up, leaving at random times. But also I do think there's like some stability there because, again, my dad and I are different people. And so he approaches leadership in a different way than I do. And And so I think some people realized that I was actually an ad, and together we make a really good person. Apart, we have little deficits. Sorry, Dad. But I think that became really clear to people, the value that I brought that had been missing before.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial role that you were hired for at Montano, and what was the kind of evolution of your role?
I think it was like sales and marketing manager, or director of sales and marketing, something like that. And I stayed in that role. And then I was just starting to do more like general GMing just by default. And so then that was promoted to that. I don't know why we changed my title, but it wasn't like it came with a pay increase or anything. I don't know, but some reason we did. There's a reason for that. And then after the winery sold in 2006, the new ownership promoted me to president. So yeah, that's sort of how that trajectory happened.
You mentioned the kind of the rehabilitation needed for the Montano, taking over a label that needed some work. Tell me about what was, as you looked at it, what was sort of the initial strategy, and what was the sort of long-term goal?
Yeah, so the initial strategy was just give it a heart, right? It didn't really have a heart, and then so give this brand a heart, give it a face, give it a purpose, right? And that was really number one. Number two was, how do we make biodynamic farming something that can be done on a larger scale, and so isn't just small, expensive producers? How do we make this available to everybody for every day? And that took a lot of work in the vineyard, and a lot of creating weird machines and stuff. And really, honestly, the long-term goal was just to not lose money, to make money. To keep growing it. We had a really simple goal, not simple, but straightforward purpose. And so that was just, we didn't have like plans to sell it. That was something that just ended up needing to happen. And we didn't have, I think we thought we could slowly grow it in order, over the course of the time, but we started out with a deficit, and then the recession was not kind to anybody. And then after the recession, even though our business was still good and we were still selling, there was just so much deferred maintenance. And I essentially said to my dad, like, I'm not going to buy this winery from you. So either we sell it or we're going to do something else. And so we took it to market. But the goals for the winery were pretty straightforward. It was, for me, it was my dad's final project before his retirement. And so it was really important for me that this was successful so that he could be comfortable when he decided to stop working. He still works. And also to create something unique and special. And I think we achieved that.
You mentioned biodynamic farming, obviously the kind of the hallmark of Montano Estate now as we think of it. Tell me about that. It's fairly early on in the biodynamic game.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, the idea of scaling that, and what that process entailed for you.
Yeah, it was a leap of faith. I think really it was a leap of faith. I remember 2008 was the first vintage that we made wine so that could be labeled biodynamic. We had, it's a 3-year conversion process. So 2008 was the first vintage. And I remember saying to the winemaker, if it's really bad, I'll come in at night and just throw a bag of yeast in something. Don't worry, like, I got you. We're gonna do this. I didn't have to do that. Demeter, it was all fine. But it was definitely a leap of faith for everybody. Just changing how we farmed, I think it was really scary. And there were some years where, we struggled with certain things because we were off, people mis-scouting things. And so there was a learning curve. But we knew we were doing something special, and I didn't really know much about biodynamics. My dad had studied it extensively. And so I was kind of like, sure, Dad, this is great. I can use this to sell wine. But I still, honestly, I've never really studied it. I've just sort of lived it. But I think for me, it became really important that we just became a model, that you could do this, and here are the tools it took, and you didn't have to like hand stir your preps, and you could make them yourself, so you didn't have to pay for that. We could really just show people that it could be done anywhere. And that was really important to me. It was one of the reasons why I felt really passionate about it, because I felt like we could model some sort of change in how, an industry that's kind of a monoculture can diversify what they're doing on their properties.
You talked about it as a marketing tool. I'm curious about that. When you took it to market, how well known was biodynamic? How much did you have to explain? Yeah,
a lot, but I learned to just dumb it down. Really, I mean, certainly over the course of time, people wanted to have more in-depth conversations about it. But in the beginning, I would say things like, it's like organic's not what you're doing, but biodynamics are the add to the property. Or I would say, I know we don't have any scientific data to back this up, but what I can tell you is that our vineyard crew's been there for 30 years, and they say they've never seen the vineyards look this good and the grapes the quality of the grapes be this high. Those and so I would just use small sound bites and small things instead of trying to describe all of it, because there are things that I don't really understand because I haven't studied it. People were like, oh, the cow horn, that's always a cliche. You dance with your dad in the moon. I'm like, no, we don't. So, I really found like I had to bring it down. I had to bring it down to earth. And if you got lost up in the more theoretical things, you would lose people. So it was, how do I give them a simple way to talk to their customer base and tell them why this is not just some crappy wine on the natural wine shelf. This is like there's a purpose here, and this is really what this means. And so it started out pretty hard. I mean, it was lots of conversations, and now it's, people know what it is, and in some ways it's kind of maybe passé. We've eclipsed, maybe not. I don't know actually what they deal with in the field anymore, but it was definitely like a learning curve for everybody. But ultimately, it was great. I mean, we were at one point the largest estate-grown biodynamic producer in the country. I mean, we were producing a lot of wine, and all farmed this way, actually really full of integrity, even though I said the thing about the yeast. I never did that. But, and that was, that was really cool. And I think we achieved that. That was a pretty cool thing. And people were responding to it. And it got us in places that I think we would never have been able to get in before then. I mean, really, we were so well represented in really great accounts. And I'm pretty lucky for that. That helped kind of turn the ship of that brand as well.
What about closer to home, as you were selling wine locally, your DTC customers? What was their reaction to Montano? Did they have a preconception about you? Did you have to break down some walls there?
Yeah, I mean, so again, this is like early 2000s, mid 2000s. So DTC was a different animal back then. And so, yes, we definitely had people that were really aghast when we started to charge a tasting fee. $5 was too much, or people that had this like lifetime taster's card, which was free, and they got a particular percentage off, and so we kind of had to deal with them, but we expanded our reach. I don't even know if this was effective, but one of the first things I did was got a booth at like the Pearl Farmers Market, and I just poured wine there, and we were able to get people out to come out to the winery based on the new messaging. And it kind of brought down from Oregon's premier wine estate to something that was a little more high touch and crafted and family oriented. And so, we built that customer base. Now the wine is still not, I mean, they certainly have higher tiers, but it was never a very expensive premium product, luxury product. So we didn't take them too far, but some people were into the farming and some people were just into the wine or the price point, so contrary to what it might sound, I rarely let in with biodynamics. I let in with the value propositions of cost to quality ratio and estate grown and et cetera, and biodynamics was a value add. And so if that was important to you, you would latch onto that, and that becomes the conversation. And if it's not, you just move on. So, I mean, every customer sees something else in a product. And so thankfully we had we had a bunch of options or, value propositions that people could connect to that were really authentic to what we were doing.
You talked earlier about your service to organizations. We have Willamette Valley Wine Growers Association, OPC, IPNC, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of burning out on those, but before that,
Yeah.
I'm curious about what led you to join the ones you did and kind of accomplishments that that are noteworthy in your mind.
Sure. I think I joined the WVWA. I don't know how I actually was invited onto that board, because it was when it was first moved from like the tiny little one to a multi-person board, and I was by far the youngest person in the room and one of only a few women, and I was so intimidated. Like, I would sit there in these meetings, and I would, in retrospect, you don't do this because it means you're not listening, but at the time I'd like rephrase the questions I was gonna ask, because I was just so like a little freaked out, because I was at this table with all these people that I respected. But again, it comes down to work. So I ended up on the marketing committee, and I'd had this altercation with our Washington distributor, and they said to me, well, Washingtonians don't drink wine the way Oregonians drink Washington wine. So, we're never going to do well here. But, maybe if you guys did some tastings. And I was like, fine, we'll do some tastings. So I went to the WVWA and I said, guys, I think we should do a tasting in Washington. Let's do a trade followed by consumer. The consumer can pay for the trade. And Stu Horseman at the time just ran with it. And so that was the first, I wish I could remember what it was called. It wasn't Pinot in the City at the time. It had a different name. But that was the first Willamette Valley Road show. And then, of course, that program continued until it stopped, COVID. And so I got to do that and be kind of fundamental in starting that program, which I think was really beneficial. And certainly it grew beyond me, and but I was part of the team that founded that. And then on that marketing committee, Brian O'Donnell came to the table with kind of a philosophical question, or more of a challenge, So if people don't think of Oregon when they think of Pinot Noir, how are we going to create some ownership over this? So I led a rebranding, it was supposed to be an consumer-driven ad campaign. So this is 2010, 11, like that, about Oregon Pinot Noir. And so we did the branding and all of that stuff. It ended up later being just sort of, that is now the visual identity of the Willamette Valley Winery Association. So it went beyond just focusing on Pinot Noir. Mm-hmm. But that was a process that I led. And so it's funny, I forget when I see the logos and stuff, because it is such a far thing. It's been 10 years, but that was a really great achievement. And so yeah, I liked that. And for IPNC, I had the opportunity to be president one year, which was pretty cool, and I got to see how that can benefit people. And at OPC, I've been the longest standing president because of COVID. This is now my third year, which is kind of exhausting. But we see it as an opportunity, so trying to use this as an opportunity to improve an already fantastic program, but how to kind of take it into this current climate that we're in. Mm-hmm. So I got really lucky on the work I got to do and the timing of getting involved with those things. Mm-hmm. The auction was created to support the Pinot campaign. It was a really dynamic time, and we were working with, Pat and David and Harry, and also there were young people like me, and so we got to do really cool stuff and integrated these different generations, and it was still really predominantly owner operator mm-hmm. then. And so it was a really special time. I feel like, maybe everybody would say that, but for me, I felt like I got to be involved at a really pivotal time in the industry. Mm-hmm.
With things like OPC and IPNC, obviously fairly unique to Oregon, uniquely Oregon things. I'm curious, your time on the boards with them, what were the kind of the hopes for the future for those kind of organizations? What now that they were established, what was the next thing you wanted to do, or that the board wanted to do when you were there?
I think IPNC, what we were dealing with at the time, and I'm sure is still a challenge, was really dealing with just the budget. What we delivered on as an event and was very high quality, and trying to make sure that we could create an event that would attract people for the next generation, because we had a great loyal group of clientele. The event was getting more expensive to execute because of the world. And so how do we take IPNC and really be able to reach our current, and without alienating the current base, and reach like the next generation? And so, I mean, obviously Whitney, I wasn't on the board with Whitney, she had left when I started, but she had started some programs, and Amy and Anne are amazing. And so I think that was one of the main things we were grappling with. Is how do we continue to sell this event out? How do we find a new audience? And then how do we keep our cost value ratio? OPC was interesting because, and it still is, I mean, right now we're grappling with, what does the industry look like? What is the pool of candidates? It is really an incredibly powerful event. And people I feel like every year somebody ends up moving to Oregon because of it. And it's really, it's a really amazing event it still is like, where other things are run by all staff. This is really still an organization of volunteers. And yes, Morgan and her team and Sue and her team did all the bulk of the work. I certainly wouldn't want to minimize that, but on the committee level, or what was the board, the education, the routing, all of that really came from these volunteer board members. And so that collaboration, which is, one of the tenets that we're going to use to sell our wine on, was really visible and really infectious. And so, I think we realized that we don't want to lose that spirit, because that really is such a unique experience for people. But we now have to look at, the landscape has changed. A buyers are now being flown to Kingdom Come to go to these events, and we're expecting people to get themselves out here. Mm-hmm. How do we address that? Mm-hmm. What's our pool of available nominees now? How have things shaped up and shaken out after this past year? And so that is really, I think, fundamentally the biggest hurdle. Obviously, prior to that, we were trying to figure out how we could make it work so to keep the ROI high for wineries, but and make the investment, because it is a big investment to be an OPC, and in addition to your dues, but also your time and wine. So that was always a thing that we've grappled with, and so now that continues to be the KPI. Everything that we talk about is, okay, how does this go back to the return on investment for wineries and campers? How do we increase that? And how do we maintain the spirit of what is just like such a unique event? But I think any industry is going to have to continue to work to keep themselves relevant, and to keep themselves, especially Oregon, kind of pushing the boundaries. That's what we've done. Remember, I don't know, the OWB years ago, the whole like farming on the edge thing that they did, which I don't think they use anymore, but really is, I think, a really great metaphor for what the industry can do and was doing at the time.
So since you're still the OPC president, I'm going to ask, as you do look ahead, or as you are looking ahead now, what do you kind of see for the future of OPC? What is it going to look like?
Oh boy, that is a great question. I think we're hoping that in 2022 we will be back in person. But your guess is as good as mine, whether or not that happens. I think we're realizing that we have to be more flexible in our invitation process. And so maybe instead of inviting a person, we invited an account, and they can nominate a person within that account. That's not official. But I think we're trying to figure out how we can make sure we're getting the best, knowing that perhaps the pool of applicants has shrunk so drastically. And trying to balance retail, which, as we all know, has just driven sales, and restaurant, even though and small, independently owned retail, because smaller producers don't have a approval at Kroger nationally, right? So how do we find a balance, and how do we find those key accounts and get them out here if their staff has shrunk, or if what their business look like is a lot smaller now. So I think we're grappling with really how to do this. But again, the KPI is always, are we is this decision still in the spirit of Oregon Pinot Camp and the Oregon industry, and is the return on investment still high for wineries and campers? And that's, everything goes back to that, and it's like a checkpoint.
So you're here now, here at Abbott Claim and Angela Estate. Tell me about that. What you mentioned, kind of one of the reasons you left was wanting to kind of do it on your own.
Yeah.
How did this opportunity come about, and what made you take this one?
Sure. Yeah. I had felt like, I was ready for a new challenge before, like long before I left, and then we sold the winery, and I stayed for that transition, and that was really hard. I love my coworkers there, and still keep in touch with many of them. But I knew that it was time. I'm like a real fiercely independent person. So working with my dad was wonderful and the greatest privilege of my life, but also like frustrating because I'm so independent. So it's complicated. So the opportunity came through a recruiter, and I remember the day of my interview. I walked in, and Albon was there, and the owner, Anthony Beck, and someone, his chief investment officer at the time, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. They just said, this is a new project, it's Abbott Claim. I didn't know Angela was involved with this. I really had no idea what I was walking into. And what he said to me was, we're starting a new brand, and it's a luxury brand. And so you're gonna be managing construction, building out a brand, building out an entire platform. And then you're gonna take our current brand and completely position it in the market. Because it's not working, we need it repositioned. And I thought, well, that's pretty dynamic. I know how to do a rebrand. I know how to do that. And I've never built a program from the ground up, and I've never run a construction project or anything like that. It's completely new to me. Although my whole family is in construction, so I should have been more versed in that, but in New Jersey. But and so that seemed like a really cool opportunity. So it was something that was really in my wheelhouse, and something that was going to be a challenge. And also, this is a luxury program, and that was also not in my wheelhouse. So I felt like it was a really nice balance of challenge and comfort. And I really liked Anthony, and I really liked Albon, and I felt like, we had an aligned vision of what we were doing, and we really did. And it was when I kind of got in there and I saw how dynamic it was, because he has wineries in South Africa. I said, well, why don't we start an import company? You're giving your margin to these importers? Why aren't you just self-importing? So my first project was really starting Beck Family Estates. I think I did that within my first week, just to have like a hierarchy of LLCs, and then start this import company and hire. I don't run it. We hired a VP of sales who manages the team and all the distribution partners, and just, for very obvious reason, that makes a lot of sense. It's not like I was rocket science. I just was the impetus, I think. And I'm sure they had thought of it before. And then just the opportunity to build brands based on, what we had and the values, but also looking at demographics and demographic shifts, and how you can have, different price points and use your economy of scale, but really have different projects where the spirit is really different. And so COVID did not serve me in this period. So, it was the really complicated rebrand, and we walked away from some land opportunities in March because we just didn't know what was happening. And so it ended up being like a very complicated thing. I mean, the opening of the winery was delayed because construction was slowed down, because rightfully so, only one contractor on site at a time. It was very, and as they should have. There was nothing wrong done, but it ended up being not as smooth as I would have liked. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud of what we've created, and I think Angela continues to evolve, and that's really fun, actually, and to see kind of how we can push this brand digitally and also in the marketplace. And then Abbott is just starting to get its feet, because we opened up right at the end of the summer, right before the fires, right before everything shut down. I mean, it was just it was a kind of hilarious, hilarious is the word, chain of events. But I'm really, really proud of what the team here has done, and how we've been able to make up for lost time. And And then, of course, the sales import company is doing really well because, again, we have lots of different price points. So I feel really good about that. Yeah, so I mean, I got a chance to really kind of stretch my legs in business and learning from people that are dealing with all different companies, and I can write a business model really quickly now and a budget, which is a really cool thing to be able to do. And I really love the team that we built here in Oregon. I mean, I think that to me is like the one of the most valuable things that I've done in the last 2 years is I feel like the people that I work with here are really special, which I really like.
So I'd like to talk about both of the brands a little bit because they both present, like you said, present unique challenges to you. So let's talk about Angela first of all, though.
Yeah.
Why the thought that it wasn't working as well as it should have been, and what was the idea for the rebrand? What was their idea? What was your idea?
Sure. So I think they thought it wasn't working well because the sales weren't there, and it was also when it was started, it was kind of like I hate to say hands off. That's not the right word, but Anthony partnered with Ken. Ken made the wine, and Anthony partnered with JFW to sell the wine. So Angela didn't have an identity that was like kind of its own. The wine was looped in with Ken, and the sales was looped in with JFW. So if you took one of the, those pieces were not connected, but not aligned, and also not very clear. So, and I think sales weren't as what he would have liked. So, I looked at it holistically. I said, okay, so you want Abbott Claim to be this, luxury, very high touch conversation, one-on-one. Okay, that's this type of demographic. So that's great. So how can everyone wants to be everything to everyone. You can't do that with one brand. So how can we position Angela, which at the time was, I think there had been quite a bit of discounting, but it was originally built to like a $50 Pinot Noir. How can we take that and reach a different demographic? And so I remember we had a retreat, maybe my first or second week of work. And, I said, I think what we need to look at is here's your, you have your high-end boomers and, younger people who are looking for discovery and a very high-touch product. And then let's take Angela and kind of position it so it's more of a lifestyle brand. And so that was really where that positioning came from. Just looking at the demographics that are underserved and what could be, I think, tolerated in regards to price point. And the Becks were on board with that. I mean, they definitely said, they're like, great, go for it, which was great, really, really cool for me. And I think, we definitely, Angela and Montano had a lot in common. There was a lot of baggage in it, and it was pretty complicated. And I almost feel like after 2 years, 2.5 years, we're almost like at the baseline. Like I feel like maybe we're just still, and again, COVID did not help, but we're just finally starting to turn that brand and we've let go of some historical stuff, and now we're looking forward. And I like being at the baseline. I don't. It's better than having to, scrounge your way up. And Abbott is, again, it was this really singular vision, and so in some ways that's a really easy thing to execute. That's great, and you can just use your very obvious values, and you hire the right team, and you make really great wine, and you farm really well, and you get to do all the right things, and that's really linear, and you can do that. Angela was definitely a more of a challenge, and it still requires work, and I think we're still, especially now that we're seeing just what's happening, just how wine is being sold. Okay, so this is we're going to do a lot of digital work. How do you become a $45, $30, $38, $45 digital brand when people can't try the wine? What is how do you reach your customer, and how do you get them to take a chance on, a perishable product? Once you open it, it's gone in an hour. Not really, but you know what I'm saying. It's different than buying napkins or shoes. You know what you're going to get. We're asking people to take a chance to reach this new customer base. So, learning what is resonating with people, and be testing different types of, really kind of learning digital marketing and ads and SEO. That's also really cool because it's just a whole new technology that I'm having to really get involved with.
So with Abbott Claim, obviously you have a linear vision, like you say, a singular linear vision, but you also have a very crowded marketplace of Oregon premium Pinot Noir. Tell me about that. How do you attack a problem like that, and how do you make sure that story fits in with the rest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, one thing is just patience is part of it, right? You have to, like I said, when I started at Montano, I just had to work hard, and I had to show up, and I had to prove myself. In some ways, we have to do the same thing. You know, we have to, every single person that comes through our doors has to experience what we want them to experience, which is a high level of hospitality and to really understand what we're doing here. So it's almost like one at a time, one person at a time. So it takes patience. And I think, you know, we're trying to build a company that will be here for a long time. So not falling into the trap of discounts or how to like incentivize people to buy more, but really just selling the wine on the value, the quality of what's in the bottle. And part of that is just true hospitality. And Andrew, who we hired, is just oozes that. It's really, really nice. And so I think it's just going to be a trek. And so we have gotten some really great traction, and what we're finding is a lot of our people are referrals from people that came. And so we know that means that people that are coming are having a great experience. We've had some people come back 4 or 5 times this year with new friends, and that's really validating. And so we just continue to kind of walk forward and beat the drum. Similarly, we've been lucky, again, we have the sales company to get some really high-end key placements around the country. And so we're slowly starting to get we never assumed this would be a big distribution product at all, but we're getting some placements that I think are going to be really good in the long run too. So, you know, it's patience, it's finding the right places where you can make headway, and it is just kind of being unrelenting on the details, right? You know, not compromising for short-term gain. You know, it's like, okay, this is the North Star. Don't compromise on that North Star, and let's be really thoughtful about how we get there, and for everything, financially, with the product. I mean, Keith changed the entire way we pruned this year. Just looking at longevity, North Star, and I don't think there's a science to it. I think it's just consistency and again, not compromising.
One thing you brought up that I thought was interesting was the sort of changing demographics, and of course we hear a lot about that when it comes to wine sales. The kind of the fear of the next, who are we going to sell wine to now? In your experience, and as you're looking ahead, what is the wine sales strategy going to be as you're looking at the upcoming generations of wine drinkers?
I mean, obviously brand loyalty is kind of out the window, but we all know that people are buying on values. So I think it's really important for brands to have a why, like a real why. And if you don't have that, I think that's a deficit. And I think we actually struggle a little bit with that with Angela. And so really working with ownership to really understand, you know, why are we doing this, and why is this wine worth buying in this crowded marketplace? And I'm, you know, so I think that's key for anybody. And I think it's so much now, and especially post-COVID, people are looking for an emotional connection and comfort. And also I think some people are really wanting to stretch themselves. And so, you know, that's pretty vague, but because I think we're just seeing what the market's coming to. But what we're seeing is that people are really excited to be introduced to new opportunities through the brands that they like, and then they're excited to be able to kind of lean into the brands that they like, and people are willing to take some risks. So, I mean, I think Gen X is probably underserved in a lot of Oregon wine marketing. I think, you know, we've really focused on trade marketing, which is a certain language, and we haven't done a lot of consumer marketing, and you can look at the brands that have and haven't, and you can see that. And so I think there needs to be a shift to consumer marketing, especially given all the consolidation in wholesale. We have to create the demand for ourselves, and that's expensive, and that's lengthy, and it's time consuming, but it can be done. So, and we're lucky that we have a major metropolitan area that's really close, and so we can do a lot of that in person. But I think consumer marketing is really where we are going to have to go. And the last year probably really kickstarted a lot of people's programs to think that way. I can't just talk about clones and barrel programs and soil, because there are some people that's what they're looking for, but there are other people that just intimidates them, but they still want to invest in money, in wine. And so, there's finding a way to engage with a larger group of people that aren't just really speaking to the trade.
So in your work at Montano and here, have you developed kind of an overarching kind of marketing and sales philosophy?
No, I don't think so, because I think everything requires its own strategy. I know you're asking me about philosophy. No, I don't think so. I think every winery has its unique set of challenges, and so really you have to, maybe this is a philosophy, you have to look at those sets of challenges and then chart your path based on them. And everyone has different strengths, and every brand has different strengths. And I think for me, a big part of sales and marketing is the people that you're working with, and are people happy? Do they feel fulfilled? And that work is visible in the work that people see. And so I think this isn't necessarily about sales and marketing, but it's more about culture and trying to create a work environment that's really positive and collaborative. And I think your sales and marketing is somewhat an extension of how your business operates.
So you have brought up the dreaded 2020 a couple of times already in this interview. Obviously, multiple challenges within the last year. I want to start with the pandemic itself. You mentioned you're just trying to get brands going and re-going, and you're hit with that. So tell me about sort of the effect on your wine life and your work here, and as you saw it, the effect the pandemic had on the industry in general. Yeah,
I had gone through the recession, so I was like kind of PTSD, like there are immediate things that I had strategies for, but I realized that strategy's out the window. We can't do this. So how am I going to, cash is king. How am I going to get the cash in the door quickly so that because I can see that this is going to be a long-term disruption. Like remember how sweet it was when we were like 2 weeks at home?
Long spring break.
But I'd been doom scrolling about COVID since the end of 2019. So, I was like, we're shutting, I think the woman that was running our tasting room at the time wasn't particularly thrilled with me. I was like, no, we're shutting the tasting room down this day. And everyone ended up having to shut down on that day. But immediately just was like, DTC, online e-commerce hadn't been a priority for Angela. It hadn't been, really something that had started. So the first real activity we did was around the holidays of 2019, we built a holiday catalog. And so we had some traction. So the first thing I did was like, well, now it's on. Like we have to communicate with our customers, if only because we're all at home and I didn't really have the foresight about what was going to happen. But we essentially, had to shut down the entire direct consumer department, and I took it on because I knew that we weren't going to be able to support it, and I didn't know how long this was going to last. So that ended up being pretty, punishing, honestly. I had 2 kids at home, little kids. I have 5 and 8-year-old, and my husband works full time, and so it was, doing all of basically running an entire e-commerce program, which was blowing up, which was awesome, and then doing my regular job, which is all of the other things, and and then trying to get capsules ordered and Italy was shut down. And so I think I called every single capsule maker in the US that made capsules for salad dressings. Like, I called everybody, and I finally found one that could do a turnaround in the normal 12 weeks. And, but I had to choose stock colors, we had some, unfortunately we had to make some, accommodations to actually make it work. And that was not awesome. And really hard. And it was hard for my kids, but also I think one of the best things that came out of the pandemic is that you didn't have to hide that you were a parent, where before I feel like I never, other than I did take my kids to work with me for 6 months, so they showed up at most board meetings, but after that, I didn't talk about it. Like, my kids that's my home life, and that nobody needed to know about them because it had nothing to do with work. And then it turned every single phone call I was on, my kids on my lap, or interviews, like my kids on the other side of the door. And we all struggled. And so, that was a really hard time. I mean, I definitely, at the end of the summer, I cried uncle, probably in May, right before our wine club shipment. I spoke to somebody and I was like, I need your help. Can you help? Because we talked about working together, but she didn't want a full-time job. And she's like, but if you ever need you have a project. So I was like, I have a project. So she helped me do that. And because I realized that I was getting so buried in the day-to-day activities that I couldn't think about the future. And so that was a huge break. And then and then I saw this as an opportunity to completely redirect Angela. So we did the summer pop-up with the Airstream last summer, which was really fun. And I was able to take what was really traumatic, but also use it as an opportunity to try to springboard a new message and a new vision. Hard time to do it. It was really successful, the people that we could get out here, but our old customer base was used to something else, and so trying to find a new customer base, and this atmosphere was really took a lot of work, but a lot of people came with us, which was pretty cool. So that was, I'm tired thinking about it. It was really hard. We were able to kind of rebuild the program, and the team, it changed. It never expanded to what it was. Our needs completely changed, and that was just what happens. And really, I don't think we didn't hire somebody for that program up until the end of the year. Really, we just kind of trying to see what was happening. I'm always conservative with money and wanting to make sure that there's always a benefit, cost benefit there. But for the industry, I think a lot of people, as I said, kind of got forced into consumer marketing, and I think that's great. I think it's really, really good. DTC has always been, I don't think it was the holy grail. Everyone thought you wanted to have a really great distribution network, even though your margin is so much slimmer. And so I think, but DTC is always where your money was, your profit was. So I think that's pretty good for the industry. I worry about us having enough people really here to support how many of us there are. And so, a lot of work that we do at Angela is really just reaching out, because I know that there's a finite people in the Portland area. So how do we find new customers digitally far away? Again, trying to just diversify our customer base. And so, I think people had to learn a lot of new tricks. I think it really pushed people to go outside of their comfort zone and engage customers in the way that they can, and it pushed us a little outside of our archaic little bubble, I think that's really good for the industry. And so COVID's terrible, it's awful, but I think in some ways we got pushed outside of where we were comfortable, and I think that was really probably necessary. But it was so hard. How you balance your family in such a traumatic scenario, and when you have a big job. I had to hire a nanny because I realized I couldn't do it. My children were not. They shouldn't watch 14 hours of TV a day. They liked it. They were really into it, but that was not good. And so I fortunately that meant that I had to come to the office, or I had to go work somewhere else, because you can't be home with the nannies there, because it's terrible for them. So it really forced me out of the house. So I got really lucky, because it meant that I had what's the word I'm looking for?
Like an outlet?
An outlet, but like a daily schedule. Like, I had things that I could do. And that was probably good. It got me out of the house. It got me out of my head. So I think in some ways I got really lucky. But, there's nothing good about this. But, just there isn't. But I think if you had to find a silver lining, I think learning new tricks, and I think realizing that we have to engage with the customers differently is great, and just really looking at our models, I think is probably important.
So with that said, what do you see as you look ahead for the industry? What do you, coming out of the pandemic, or what has changed that will stay the same, and what does the future of the industry look like from your perspective?
I don't mean to be like negative Nelly, but I don't know if we're out. Like I feel like this
on the eventual coming out side, I guess is what I meant to say.
I feel like we're going into it now.
Yeah.
Well, I think direct consumer is gonna be a huge investment. We're gonna see a lot of investment in that for the industry, and I think that's important. I think there's a dearth of great DTC employees right now, and that is a real area of growth. And so if I were new to the industry, that's what I would get really good at, because I think that's going to be it is a need now and will continue to be a need. And our programs here are still kind of in their infancy when you compare it to Napa. So I think there's a lot of room for growth and to do kind of cool things. I also think we're going to have to contend with some of the issues that we have, our farming overtime laws, pricing, COGS. I think there's some real production hurdles we're going to have to look at and contend with, and figure out how we're going to make sustainable business models. It's already expensive to grow and make wine here, but maybe some of the old assumptions on what leads to quality need to be questioned in order to make that work. And I think we're going to have to get more comfortable mechanizing. I know that's not sexy. I get it. Albon would be like roll his eyes at me, but I think we're going to have to learn how to kind of balance the craft and just the beauty of it, and also innovation to really make sustainable business models. Wine was hard before, but now it's really going to be challenging, and great that people are going to be focusing on a higher margin income, a revenue stream, but we're going to have to do it on both ends.
I neglected to ask the other part of the 2020 question, which was of course harvest and the fires. Tell me again, from your perspective, the impact on you and your work here, and sort of the workarounds you had to come up with, or the things you had to sort out.
I feel so lucky that our owner is also uncompromising, and so wouldn't tolerate us putting out wine that we didn't think was great. He trusts Albon, obviously. So in some ways we got really lucky. But we decided against probably his preferences to bring in all the fruit we had on the property. We didn't make anyone buy anything, and for all of our growers, they said, "Do you want it?" And we're like, "Well, we don't, but we will buy it if you need to sell it to us." And some people are like, "I have crop insurance, it doesn't matter, don't take it." And other people needed us to buy it. So we tried to do right by every grower, and the people who purchased the grapes from us also, really did right by us. So I felt really proud to be in the industry with the people that we were working with, because they really did kind of honor that. Other people didn't, but the groups that we work with did, and we did the same. But we're really lucky. Beyond lucky that we didn't have to make super hard choices. Like, we just realized that we brought it all in because it was a beautiful vintage. It was Heath's first year managing these vineyards, and it was great. And so we were like, well, we can't let that sit. We have to drop it anyway. We can't. It's going to cost us. We already have the overhead. We're bringing in some Chard and some Syrah. So let's just bring it in. We're already doing it. And of course, we've sold it all off on bulk. We're not going to bottle it, except for a little bit of rosé and Chard. Chard's actually quite beautiful, but and the Syrah, untouched, great. But that's just a tiny little bit for the Angela Wine Club. It was like, I think at the end of harvest, we all went to the coast for a night to go crabbing, and we were like, to the best worst harvest in history. It was really, that's what it was. It was sobering, and we realized that this is probably not the first time that was going to happen, and this is perhaps kind of like the dawn of a new dynamic and that we were witnessing, and that's terrifying, but you just make the best decision you can in the moment. And so we brought in the fruit, and thankfully we've been able to sell it, or sell the bulk, and again, we're really lucky to have an owner who doesn't want us to compromise on the product that we make. So I think other people had a much harder time than we did, and I totally know how lucky we are, and I feel very thankful of that. But it was like being on Dune, you know, it was really, as you know, it was crazy.
Very post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was anyway, as you look ahead then for yourself, and for the future here, what are you looking forward to? What are you kind of foreseeing for your work and your future, and for the brands here? I'm just the type of person that wants to continue to grow and be doing things that are challenging, and trying to push the envelope, and that's just me, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. I think we have a lot of work to do for both brands. We really, we're, as I said, we're just at a baseline with Angela, so we're really working to build that, and consumer marketing, as I said, I think is the future. So really trying to find our voice within that, and that's a really fun project and really challenging, especially for this category. And so, I'm really looking forward to finding the voice and honing that in. And it's really cool to see the traction, and it's really cool to see people respond to it, and to know you're not done. And so it's like positive reinforcement. Keep going. And I think we're probably the same thing here with Abbott Claim. We know, as I said earlier, we have a lot of hard work to do, and everything we do has to be as well as it can possibly be done, and in order to last and to really stand out in this very crowded place of great premium wines. And so, we are one foot in front of the other, working really hard. We certainly haven't, buildings open, we're seeing people, wines labeled, websites are up. That's just the beginning. We have so much hard work left to do, and we're, it's exciting. And I think perhaps a lot of people are in the same position. We've had this year that was hectic and stressful and just unbelievable, and yet we're kind of nowhere, right? So it's like we almost lost a year, even though that year was so hard to get through. And onwards. There's nothing else to do but then just to keep going and do it as well as you can possibly do it. It's a very human answer to 2020, just onwards.
Yeah, what else are you going to do? I don't know what else to do other than just keep moving. And that was kind of what you did last year. You just kept going, and if you stopped, it was too shocking. But yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that one of your pieces of advice would be to become a DTC expert if you wanted to work in the Oregon wine industry. What other words of wisdom would you have for someone who wanted to get into the Oregon wine industry?
Okay. Yeah, so I think obviously DTC is a great area of growth, and that is, I think, not sexy because it's a lot of customer service, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think if you were going to get into the industry, learn the supply chain, learn how that all works, try to understand different parts of it, get involved with all the pieces, because all the pieces inform the other. So if you're completely, focused on one thing, you're going to miss how that intertwines with the other departments and the other areas. And so I don't think you can really, no matter where you are, you can really do your job well without understanding what other people are doing. And not everyone would agree with me about this, but I do think people get so seduced by wine. It's such a sexy thing, and it's so elegant and it's beautiful and there's vineyards and whatever. But and that's true. And yet it's still an industry, and these are still businesses, and you know, employees still need health insurance, and et cetera, you know. And so I think realizing that this is not an easy job, it's not an easy industry, and that this isn't going to be a 9-to-5 job. It just isn't. And this isn't where you get to go and just kind of like drink wine and eat a baguette. So I think that like people need to be aware of that. Like really look at what you want your life to look like. You know, what is it? How do you want to spend your days? What do you want to be doing? And because the worst thing is when you and I've seen this happen a lot of times. You have people join the industry and then they're just like, this is crazy. You know, this is too much work, or people aren't, you know, like this is so antiquated. Who uses sell sheets? Why is there so much paper? I'm like, well, you know, I can't help you. There's just paper. Although it may be different now. You know, but really looking at that because, you know, I think that can be a big barrier to entry for people, or be a reason that they lack success. Yeah, I think those probably.
So what you're saying is that there are emergencies in the wine industry.
I am saying that. My dad lied. Yes, there are definitely emergencies, unfortunately. That would have been great.
That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
I don't think so.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, for your thoughts and your candor, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thanks.
Thank you.